thank you very much, Maria, for that wonderful introduction. I have the privilege of sharing the stage today with the leadership of the Oregon Legislature. I have Speaker of the House, Julie Fahey, and President of the Oregon Senate, Rob Wagner. So please join me in welcoming the two of them. I will say that to begin with, we are strategically placed here this afternoon to help with your digestion of your lunch. So this is going to be non-acidic. We have a very warm conversation in front of us. And once again, I'm very proud and pleased to be here on the stage with the Speaker and the President. First, I want to say congratulations to both of you for being elected and for your leadership roles. And more importantly, to thank you for leading our state and taking care of the state and making it better for everyone who inhabits the state. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, there are some in this audience who might believe that you pursued elective office for fame, fortune, and constant adulation. And I'm saying there are some who might believe that. I always tell my staff, get the information, get the facts from the horse's mouth. So at this time, I'm going to ask each of you to share a little bit of your background with us, your history, and please share with us what led you to pursue elective office at the state legislature. And I'll start with you, Julie.
Thank you, Charles. Welcome, everyone. I'm Julie Fahey. I represent and proud to represent a district in Lane County. I've seen a ton of Lane County people here today, so shout out. And I was elected in 2016, so this is going into my 9th year in the legislature. Before I ran for office, I had a career in the private sector, and the legislature is a part-time legislature, so I continued some of that work for my first few terms. I was a business consultant, and I worked with companies and nonprofits mainly on workforce issues. So how do you build a skilled workforce? How do you attract and retain employees and build career paths for people? And in that work, as a business consultant, I was a problem solver. So companies would come to me and say, we're losing people, our turnover's too high, we can't recruit the right kind of people, or we need to develop these people from within our companies, and we can't keep people around. And so that, to me, that is who I am at my core, is a problem solver. And I could talk about why I ran for office and the issues that I'm really passionate about, housing in particular, education, and we will do that. But for me, ultimately, the goal of public service and the goal of running for office was so that I could work on problems at the state level. And I think the state legislature is a very interesting place to do that. We are, in my mind, it's the exact sweet spot of we have challenges as a state, we have problems we need to solve, and the state legislature can take action to solve those things. At the congressional level and the federal level, they're often mired in gridlock, and so not able to get things done. But at the state level, we really still can take action. And so for me, it's the best place to be able to solve problems.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And President Wagner, you entered the Senate in 2018, and you were elected in District 19. See, I'm an accountant, so I have to work with these numbers. And you were elected in your home territory. You grew up in that area, which is probably great and sometimes probably even more challenging for you. So among your many interests, you are very passionate about higher education accessibility. And we've heard a lot of talk earlier this morning about education and the critical need for advancement in education. So I would ask you to answer the same question. Give us your journey.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks again for everyone for being here. It's always nice to have the immediate post-lunch opportunity when everyone's full on their brownie and it's kind of that soporific time where everyone's nodding off in the back, but we appreciate you being here. I grew up in the heart of my Senate district. So my Senate district runs from basically Ross Island Bridge down through Southwest Portland, Lake Oswego, which is where I grew up, West Lynn, and then over to Tualatin. And I really found my passion of public service from my parents, who gave me just that sense of growing up and knowing that we were all responsible for giving something back to our community. I come from a family of educators, so both of my sisters are public school teachers. I go all the way back to my great-grandparents who met in a public school down in Northern California. I'm a recent empty nester, so sent my youngest off to college this fall, so 4 kids out. You can imagine the ouch that comes with that, with a few of them in college at the same time. And I found my passion for the legislature almost half of my life ago. I was a college dropout from going to school on the East Coast. I had a major health issue. And so I came back to Portland State University. Are there any Vikings or anyone who's taking classes? Give it up. And I found an internship doing in the state capitol. I ended up becoming a staffer and then went away to grad school, but came back and I was a legislative advocate for teachers. And then really where I found my passion was working at Portland Community College. And the time that I left before I came into the Senate, I was the executive vice president looking at different things for advancement. My favorite thing was raising scholarship money for students and knowing that they were working so hard to find a pathway out of poverty and into the middle class and into career training. And that's the thing that I try to bring with me every single day when I'm in my legislative service.
Okay, well, thank you for that. My wife is a proud Viking graduate, so I'll tip my hat to you. There's been a lot of talk about ducks and beavers and others, but my tie is a devil tie, and that's all I'm going to say. Go Sun Devils. No? Oh, well. We've heard a lot about issues facing our state and challenges facing our state, and there's a lot of work to be done. And as we look forward to the 2025 session, Speaker Fahey, I would ask you, with the plate being so full of priorities, what policy ideas and budget requests are you facing? I mean, there's so much. What do you see as the key priorities this session? And most importantly, when it's done, what do you want to be remembered for regarding the 2025 session?
Well, I would say for me, I start from the place of what do Oregonians want us to work on? And I feel like we heard that very loud and clear in the election season. Affordability and cost of living concerns are top of mind for Oregonians right now. And so as the legislature, there are key pieces that we're going to need to take on housing, on healthcare, on utilities, on prescription drug costs, on childcare, to try and make those things more affordable for everyday Oregonians. And building more of those things and making sure we're building more housing and more childcare infrastructure, that is a key part of affordability. But there are also some key pieces around making government work and making government work in a more efficient and effective way. I'll let President Wagner talk about the transportation package and some of those other key things, but we have some funding mechanisms that we need to update around transportation, around wildfire funding, the way we fund Medicaid in this state. Not controversial, but it needs to be renewed next year, and it's extremely important because 1 in 3 Oregonians get their health care through Medicaid. So there are a number of key issues that we're working on, really big things. And of course, our education system as well. So we might tag team a little bit here. And
yeah, well, I think the speaker said, and we've heard a lot already this morning, you're going to hear more during the breakout session around transportation. I would say the two issues I'd like to highlight are transportation, and then also what are we doing in terms of our economy and our budget at the state level. So on transportation, we have to have a system that's going to be able to reliably move freight and move people across our region and across all 4 corners of Oregon. We know that the Highway Trust Fund, because it's dependent on gas tax, is actually phasing out. The more efficient we are with EVs and other forms of transportation, we are actually losing our revenue source. So right now, there has been a group that has gone across the entire state, 12 different community meetings. They're doing work groups right now, and then we'll be heading into the legislative session talking about the need for coming together. Historically in Oregon, we've done a transportation package where we would have legislators that come together and receive input and then put a package together for several years. The way that we're approaching the conversation around transportation is through stability and safety, and trying to get upstream so that we actually have a revenue source and a system to be able to fund transportation for the long term. So it's not just coming in and sort of doing the horse trade around specific projects, but how are we making sure that we're having a transportation that meets the future needs of all Oregonians in every single sector in a way that's responsible, fiscally responsible, but sets us up for the future. And I will say, keeps ODOT, I think I saw Chris Strickler out here, and I know he's going to get an earful, but keeps them accountable for the resources and the tax dollars that we have. It is absolutely critical if we are going to win the faith of the electorate for the state of Oregon, and people are going to be looking at additional revenue, that we have to make sure that our transportation system is accountable to every Oregonian.
And I think while we are doing those big, sorry, I stepped on your applause line,
Oh, no,
sorry.
that's okay.
While we are doing this big work around transportation and other key things, we have to keep up the focus on the progress we've made in recent years too. Starting in 2021, we made big investments in the behavioral health care sector, facilities and workforce, and we're starting to see progress on that front, including in Lane County. We just announced plans for a behavioral health stabilization center and a psychiatric hospital. And housing and homelessness. We've made big investments, we've changed policies, and we are starting to see that progress, and we cannot just switch to the next thing. We have to maintain our work that we're doing and the progress we're making on those big issues.
And I will maybe come in over the top and amplify this by saying, at the state level, we are constitutionally responsible for balancing the budget every 2 years. We cannot deficit spend. That means that the demands on the general fund, on lottery, and on the different revenue sources, mostly through fees and other funds, we're coming off of having a bunch of federal money during the COVID pandemic, and that is going away. Costs, we know, are increasing, and so we have a lot of demand at state government, and we're gonna have to be really accountable for the resources. I think this is sort of a back to basics time. We need to look at the fundamental services that people are expecting us to be able to come forward and fund. And I will also say that 2/3 of the legislature or thereabouts when we come into this next legislative session are going to be new. And so I think there's kind of an expectation or very recent to their legislative service. So I think it's going to be a little bit of an education for everyone to come in and understand that resources are limited and we have a responsibility to balance our budget responsibly.
Yep. Well, thank you. And as you know, and as everyone in the room knows, it's all about investment. This is a business-focused organization and a business session about our economy. And I always bring up my wife because it serves me well at home. And I tease her because she invests in plants. Our house is full of plants. You have to water them, you have to repot them, you move them around, you have to get the right lighting, but that's what we're looking at with our economy. We have to invest in the economy. We heard Senators Wyden and Merkley talking earlier about investments, and when we look at our last full session, you passed an historic package in support of the semiconductor sector. And this has led to announcements of up to $35 billion in new investments in Oregon that will create up to 6,000 new high-paying jobs. So as you look at 2025, what can the legislature do to strengthen our economy?
I would just start and say, I think over the last few years, the legislature's focus on sort of traditional economic development has been on trying to take advantage of all of the federal opportunities for funding that have come our way. So semiconductors, I think, was the highest profile, biggest swing at that. But I also don't think we can lose sight of some of the other pieces that came from the Inflation Reduction Act or transportation infrastructure. There was a significant economic development opportunities for us in semiconductors, but also in renewable energy sector, in infrastructure construction, even in things like HVAC renovations in schools, which there was federal money available for and creates local jobs and is a kind of underrated intervention in schools. It really matters for kids learning. So the last few years, we've really, there's been so much federal opportunity that the legislature needed to take action to make sure that we could maximize the amount of federal dollars that were coming to our state. That is slowing down a little bit, although not. I expect that there will be some pieces in 2025 as well. But I want to take just a second to talk about sort of non-traditional economic development, which in my mind, a lot of things in this state go back to housing and the lack of housing supply that we have here in this state. We need to build over 100,000 units just to meet the need right now, and then over 500,000 over the next 20 years. And the lack of housing is driving up the cost of housing. And when you pull up and look at the 40,000-foot level around our economy generally, We have, for the last 10, 20 years, relied on in-migration into the state. In-migration has been a really important part of growing our economy. But when you see migration patterns around the country, people are leaving states that have high cost of housing and going to places where housing is more affordable. If we don't solve the housing challenge in this state, we're going to continue to see folks looking for places where it is more affordable to live. So it goes back to affordability, which is the piece that I led in on the last question. Our economy, we can do these can and should make these investments in traditional economic development, but we can't take our eye off the ball of housing, which is such an important part of growing our economy as well.
Well, and I would say, when I was in high school and college, I ran cross country and track. And I remember I had this incredible coach that would say two things. One is, when you took the hill and you knew that there was a flat coming up, you wanted to recover ahead. So you push as hard as you can to get up to the top of the hill, but you don't cut your energy there. You got to make sure that you crest the hill so that you can actually recover, get your oxygen back. But you also, in cross country, you didn't make progress as a team unless everybody on those top 5 were able to score. And so when you were training, you made sure everybody came along with you. And we've seen that we need to make data-informed decisions around strategic investments for people, and we don't fall further behind. I thought it was interesting looking at inflation trends as we're talking about data-informed. Some of the highest inflation rates in the country, and we saw this reflected in some of our recent elections, were actually in the Southeast. If you look at Florida and Alabama and South Carolina and Tennessee. So the West Coast also experienced a pretty high rate, but some of those places where people maybe were moving were also experiencing a pretty high level of financial strain. Here in Oregon, we need to make sure that we don't lose childcare, that we're expanding ERDC, that we're making sure that we have Medicaid for children that are responsible to be able to send children to a doctor so that when they have an earache, they're not having to go to the emergency room. We know that rent is also something that people are expecting us, and utilities and prescription drug prices. And I do believe that those are things that Oregonians are expecting us to do. I want to make one final note, and I know we're sort of coming up a little bit against time, that a friend of mine who actually is a Republican leader in the Senate, sat up here and kind of made a point that 23 was really hard. We had really difficult conversations around reproductive health and gender-affirming care and things that in a lot of rural communities are really hard to talk about, like gun safety, gun control. And I did think that coming out of that legislative session, that looking into 24, we were also able to make incredible investment by people working together across all 4 corners of Oregon. In a couple days, we will actually be in a short session that is going to be laser focused on making sure people in rural regions are getting compensated for the incredible work they did in recovering from the wildfire this last legislative session. We are all stronger as a state when we're working together, and we can make every effort to try to focus on those critical issues.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you. And you touched on something in your response that is our last question, and it's about talent development. Anything that's going to be successful is going to be based on the talent of the people that are working towards the objective. And I will ask you this. In the Oregon Business Plan's Vision for Shared Prosperity, we call out the imperative to provide education and training to all Oregonians in a way that connects them with career opportunities. Education and training are a big share of the state budget. What can we do to make those resources more productive?
So since you mentioned your spouse, I feel responsible that I need to mention mine. My wife is a business executive for high-tech companies out of Silicon Valley. She was a gubernatorial appointee to the Oregon Workforce Talent Advisory Board, and she also sits on the board of Portland Community College. I came out of that space, and I do know that there's nothing more valuable than trying to make strategic investments in the people that are trying to get ahead. When you can see the life that you change by someone coming out of poverty and be able to find meaningful a career or higher education that takes them into the middle class and beyond, it is transformational, and it benefits our economy because there is someone where you're breaking the cycle of poverty and you're adding back to the economy. So I'm very bullish on strategic investment around the people that are trying to get ahead. So I think that's going to be a big focus of mine.
Well, and I will close by saying, oh, yes, please, thank you. Speaker Fahey, you heard from Andrew Gailey and Sonora Vella, who are coming to us from Lane County, your area, and they are the future. And your point, President Wagner, is all about investing in the future, and that's our youth. So I know we're all not young in the audience, but we're still providing value, but our investment in the future, speaking to what President Wagner said, what would you add on that to get us off the stage today?
Yeah, I would say investment is critically important, and one of the biggest and most important responsibilities of the state legislature is to fund our school system. K-12, but also higher ed and early learning, importantly. And I think we need to be having some hard conversations about what are we getting for that investment? Are we getting the return, the outcomes on those investments that we would like to see? And so for me, there's a really important piece of the question was about how can we maximize the effectiveness of those investments, and we really have to be looking at evidence-based ways to improve the outcomes we're seeing from our students. We, last year in the legislature, in partnership with the governor, took some pretty big swings at expanding summer learning opportunities and early literacy work, things that we know are evidence-based ways to improve student outcomes. And we need to continue that work next year in the session, and also be thoughtful about, what are we asking of our local districts? And what are we expecting of them when, at the state level, we provide that funding? So I think those are tough conversations. We're a local control state here in Oregon, but we need to see better outcomes from our students, and it's the question of how much investment and what we invest in is one of the most critical things we'll take on next year.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Please join me in thanking Speaker Fahey, President Wagner.
All right.